Hi there, my name is Carissa from Reformed Acres, and today I thought I would bring you along on a bread making day. So, since becoming pregnant, and at the time of filming this voiceover, I'm around 18 weeks pregnant, but this time around, this is my fourth son, I just have not wanted to make bread. It seems like the most difficult thing, which it totally isn't, but the thought of mixing up some dough just does not sound fun. So I thought I would do a day where we tried to get 3 to 4 recipes done and I can put them in the freezer and just be done for a couple weeks. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I started off by writing out a list and trying to figure out what I needed to do based on the timing that the breads needed to rise and bake. And I kind of came up with my flow of what I wanted to do. And I had 4 breads written down, but you'll see later why we only got to 3 of them. But the first one that I wanted to start with was the easiest to do, and that is the English muffin bread. Now, this one is so good. It makes 2 loaves, and I promise you, these things are not going to last in your house if you make it. It is so, so good. My family gobbles it up. So we're starting with some yeast. I like to keep my overflow yeast in the freezer, and I will just fill up the little container that I have in the fridge. And you just saw me checking the recipe. I'm going to be doing that a couple times throughout this video. But yeah, I like to keep the yeast in the freezer, like get the big ones from either Costco or Sam's, and they keep really, really well. So we're just adding some sugar to this yeast and water mixture. And then I had the milk, honey, I think some additional water heating up on the stove, and I will have all of the recipes linked down below because there is no way that I can keep up with filming this voiceover and then also referring to the recipes. And, don't worry about writing anything down, just enjoy and check it later. But I also needed to get some flour in here. This recipe is really awesome because it's basically just mix and go, especially using the instant rise yeast. And if you're wondering what this giant bucket is, I like to keep about 75 pounds of flour in the house at any given time. And so I do have some flour that I keep in the kitchen, but it was running low, and so I needed to go ahead and grab the bucket. Like I said, I'm pregnant with my fourth son. We do a lot of bread baking, so we definitely need to have a lot of flour in the house. And then, of course, cannot forget the salt. Your bread will taste absolutely disgusting if you don't have salt, so make sure to never leave that out. And then honestly, that is it. We just mix up the dry ingredients, the wet ingredients. We're going to add in some baking soda and we're just going to mix it. It's really, really simple. This is one of the easiest recipes to make. If you don't feel comfortable making English muffins, which I have never done because I don't know how to make them, but if you don't feel comfortable doing that, just whip up this bread. It is the exact same consistency, exact same texture, super, super easy. So like I said, this makes 2 loaves, so I'm just getting those sprayed down, and then we're going to get to like the secret ingredient of why these are like English muffins. So what I'm sprinkling on here is the cornmeal. And so you want to get it on your loaf pans, just get it pretty evenly coated, just sprinkle that on there. And then we're also going to put this on the top before it bakes. And this is the ticket, that English muffin, the coating that's on there. This is what that is. And so you are going to have a really gloopy dough. In fact, I think that's what the recipe says. It's going to be kind of crazy. You're like, how is this going to turn into bread? But just trust me, just try to spoon it evenly into these loaf pans. As it rises, it'll fill the pan and you don't have to worry about not having it perfectly even. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just getting it spooned in there. This is so easy. Like if you've never made bread, I hope this gives you some confidence. One of the other things I love about this recipe is it is fast. We have not even done any rise time yet. We have just mixed some stuff and we are already putting it in these loaf pans. And all it has to do is rise for a short amount of time and then you're ready to stick this in the oven. So if you're looking for something quick for a breakfast, if you wake up early, or even for lunch, you get this started in the morning and you want to do this with some eggs or something like that for lunch, this is one of those recipes that you can do that. You're going to get some instant gratification on this one because it's so quick. And so I'm just trying to smooth this out to no avail. You really do not have to do this. It's all going to fill into the pan and rise as it goes. Just place a towel or something like that over it and let it rise for 30 to 45 minutes. And then you're going to be ready to bake. Like I said, this is so quick. So let's move on to the next recipe, and that is going to be some bagel bites. Now, what I have here is some leftover whey from making yogurt. I have found that you can use this 1 for 1 in place of water if you want to do so. And I like to do that as much as I can, as much as I remember. So I am going to be heating that instead of the water for this bagel recipe. And this recipe is actually like a bagel recipe, not bagel bites. But I do, instead of making 8 bagels, I will make 16 of just like a bagel type roll situation. I find it's just easier to cut. It's the right size for my kids. They're 5 and under. So that's what I'm doing. But of course, you could make this recipe doing that. You could make it in traditional bagels and just shape it that way. It's totally up to you. So once that whey was warm, not too hot, just a couple minutes on like a medium heat, I'm adding that in there and then it's time to add our flour. Now, for me, being in Florida where it's super humid, even now in December when I was filming this, I can always use the exact amount of flour that a recipe calls for and pretty much guarantee that I'm going to need to add more. If you're new to baking bread or you haven't done a recipe before, I definitely encourage you to maybe do a little less than it calls for just until you get a feel for how your kitchen and flour and things like that react. But for me, I can pretty much always add exactly what it calls for, and I'm going to need to add a half a cup to a cup more. So I added in some oil, which I'm pretty sure I didn't need. I think that oil was just to coat the bowl, but it's such a small amount that it doesn't really matter. Again, don't follow me, just check the recipe. But I'm just feeling the dough here to see if it's the right consistency. This is a little bit of a like stiffer dough, which is really nice to work with because it's not super sticky. So I'm coating the bowl with the oil that I shouldn't have put into the dough. And just like that, we have our second dough mixed up. This one had quite a long time in the mixer, but it's mixed up, it's halfway done, and we can move back to our English muffins. We're just going to leave that, let it rise and double. And look, these English muffin bread loaves, these are basically done. And so it's back to that secret ingredient. You've got to add the cornmeal on top to give it that nice English muffin texture. And I'm pretty liberal with this. Now, when you take it out of the pan, it's going to kind of go everywhere. This is a little bit of a messy recipe when you are taking it out to cool, but it's so worth it. So definitely just slather this cornmeal all over so that you have that nice texture. And then these are honestly ready to go in the oven. It is that easy. But this is where we start having some technical difficulties. You can see that the lights are flashing. My oven is turning on and off right as I'm about to put these in. And so I'm just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. And we do have a generator that will power our house if we lose power. So that's why I wasn't worried about getting these in the oven. But this is where my plan changed on if I was going to be able to make that fourth recipe. I was going to make some sandwich bread. And right here, I decided that that was not a good idea, that I needed to make the bread that I had already mixed up and then give it a rest and make some later tonight when we actually got power back. But yeah, it is flickering on and off. So this is looking pretty unstable at this point for bread baking. But praise God for the generator because it did kick on, it stabilized everything, and I was able to get this in the oven and continue on. If not, I would have just had to stop because we didn't get power back for I think another hour or two. So because of that generator, we were able to keep going. And I go ahead and I pop these things in the oven. And when they come out, they look so good. If there's any recipe in this whole video that I think you should try, it's this one. Just, I know I've said it a couple times, but it's so incredibly easy. It's really kid friendly. Toast it up, put some jam on it. So super delicious. And I'm going to pop this out right away because I don't want this to get soggy or like soft on the bottom at all. I don't want to trap that moisture in from the warm pan because this is English muffin bread. And while we're probably going to toast it before we eat it, you still want it to be kind of as crisp as possible, if you know what I mean. So we're just going to flip that out and let it cool on a wire rack. And now we're going to move back to our bagel bites. So one of the things that makes a bagel is boiling it in a baking soda and sugar bath before you bake it, which is something that I didn't know. It's very similar to what you do to make pretzels. So bagels and pretzels and things like that are actually really easy to make. You just need to boil them in a set mixture before you bake them. So don't feel like you can't do those things. Super, super easy to make. Just need to boil them first. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this dough up. Like I said, this recipe calls for you to put it into 8 sections to make like 8 normal size bagels. But I'm going to mix it into 16. I think 16 is what we do. You actually see that this is just not very scientific. I'm not weighing this or anything to make sure that they are even, just kind of going by feel and trying to get around 16. It's actually a little bit of a train wreck as I'm watching it. Like, this is just not a very efficient way of cutting these in half. But anyway, we get there, we get them cut in half. This just works way better for my family. It's a pretty good size too because you're cutting them in half like you would a bagel. And it's just the perfect little side for some eggs or something like that. Can you tell that we homestead? I'm talking about eggs a lot. We eat that a lot, but this is just perfect. It's the perfect size. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get these cut up, and then we are going to shape them up. Now, if you're doing the larger ones, it's very easy to shape things into a bagel shape. For me, you see that I'm just kind of rolling these into some sort of ball-like shape. But if you were doing a bagel, you would just kind of roll one of the 8 pieces into a ball. You would poke a hole through the middle with your finger and then just kind of roll it to get that circular shape. Once you start doing it, you'll kind of see what I mean, but that's how you would make that shape. Now, once we have the baking soda and sugar mixture boiling, we're going to put the bagel bites in the water. This recipe calls for them to boil on each side for 3 minutes. So then after the first 3 minutes, you're going to flip it 3 more minutes. I prefer to do 2 minutes. So I think here I set my timer for 3 and then I change it to 2. So I prefer to do 2 minutes. Then you flip them while they're still in the water. Boil them for 2 more minutes and then put them on your parchment paper. And I usually do this in about 2 to 3 batches just to make sure they have enough room in the water. When you put them on your parchment paper, it does not matter if your bagels or your bagel bites are touching. They're not really going to rise much more than this. And because they are that kind of like stickier, wet consistency, you'll see what I mean when you do this. But since they are that consistency, they're not going to stick together or anything like that. They're kind of that glossy bagel texture, so you don't have to worry about if they're touching at all. And you're just going to do this boil for a couple minutes, flip, boil, take out. You'll do that until they're all finished, and then they can go straight into the oven. You can get as creative as you want with adding toppings, and you would add them after the boiling stage. Whether you did cheese, everything bagel seasoning, whatever you want to do, that's when you would add it before you bake them. While these are baking, it is now time. I want to put these English muffin loaves into these freezer bags. And these are just some bread bags. I have had these forever. I can't even tell you when I ordered them. It was a bunch of 200. I will link them below. I'll link anything that I'm using in the description below. But it's like 200 of them, and I've had them for years. What I love about them is they're really thick, so they're great for the freezer, but they're also such a good shape. They're really large, they expand, so you can put those artisan loaves, those crusty bread loaves that are kind of larger, you can put those in these bags, and you're good to go. They fit for sure. I baked these bagel bites for about 25 minutes, and this is what they're looking like. They definitely look homemade, but they're super yummy. They've got that chewy texture. My kids love them. And so at this point, it's later on in the evening. My kids have gone to bed, dinner's done, and I'm going to get together this overnight crusty artisan loaf recipe. Now, I have a couple recipes that I like for a more artisan loaf, and this one is really nice because you don't have to do much. The overnight situation does all the work for you, just it sitting on the counter overnight. So you really just need to mix up your flour, your water, your yeast, and your salt, mix it up with a spoon, and you're basically good to go. And so that's what I'm doing here. I meant to mention this earlier, but you've probably already noticed that none of these recipes involve sourdough. I do not enjoy the process of making sourdough. I feel like it's another kid to keep alive, and I have enough of those. So I really just prefer yeasted recipes. I think it's great. Refrigerated yeast works great, great results. So if you're like me and you don't love sourdough, you are welcome here, and these recipes are for you. So I'm just mixing this up. This is a very wet and hydrated dough, not as gloopy as the English muffin bread, but you'll see that there's a big difference in the hydration level of this and the bagels. And that is pretty consistent if you're making like an artisan loaf. it's always going to be more wet. If you're making something like a hamburger bun or a bagel, it's always going to be a little bit drier. So that's just, that's what I figured out as far as consistency goes of the dough. But I just covered this and let it sit all night. And then in the morning before my kids got up, I started preheating the oven, and you want to preheat the oven with your Dutch oven in it. That's how you're going to get this dough to not stick to your Dutch oven when you go to bake it, is you need to have a really hot Dutch oven and a really hot oven. So preheat it with your Dutch oven in there with the lid on, and then I am just going ahead and shaping this dough. Like I said, this is right when I woke up. It's a very quiet thing, so you're not going to wake your kids up, but I'm just taking this out and I'm shaping it. It does need quite a bit of flour on the counter because it is such a wet dough. But trust me, it's so good and fluffy and crispy on the outside, soft on the inside. This recipe is definitely a winner in our household. And just like I don't do sourdough, I also really don't know how to shape loaves. So we're just kind of putting this in a circular shape. Ugly bread tastes the same as pretty bread, so it's no big deal. And we're just getting it shaped up into something sort of circular. And then I like to put this on some parchment paper. It just makes the whole thing a little easier when I'm getting it in the Dutch oven. I have a series of burns on my arm that are consistent with putting bread into Dutch ovens. I burn myself in the same spot every time, so the parchment paper makes it a little bit easier for me. Placed a towel on it, and we are letting this rise for about 30 minutes. At this point, the kids are up, but it's okay because the bread is ready. It's ready to bake, still very hands off. So we're just taking this hot Dutch oven out. Be very careful because it is hot, and we're going to place the bread with the parchment paper in there. You don't have to use the parchment paper. You can place this dough straight in there. Like I said, it's just a safety issue for me because I'm so clumsy when it comes to hot stuff. But then we're putting the lid back on, and we're going to bake it for 25 minutes with the lid on. After that time, we're going to take it out. Be careful, it's very hot. And then the recipe says to cook this for another 10 minutes with the lid off. It could be 10, it could be 15. You just really want it nice and browned when you take it out. So just judge it based on that. But then when you're done, you have this beautiful artisan loaf that took you basically no time at all. Thank you so much for baking this bread with me. I hope that you will try one of these recipes. I hope that you are having a great day, whatever time of day it is, and I will see you in the next video.